I just want to say it was a great joy to be here. Last time I was in Noida was 2008, I believe it was. Is that right, Mr. Gita? It was probably about 2 centuries ago.
Yes,
From
2 centuries ago.
Okay. And I just want to say this is just the most beautiful temple you have. There's such a beautiful energy here, and I can see that the masters are all very pleased with what's going on here. And so, as Vijay said, I've lived in Ananda Village since 1977. I've known Vijay since that time. We've done many fun adventures together, including digging up a whole field of potatoes at one time in our lives, believe it or not. So, and it's a joy to see my dear friend Vijay also. So let's begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father,
Heavenly Father,
Divine Mother,
Divine Mother,
friend, beloved God,
friend, beloved God,
Jesus Christ,
Jesus Christ,
Babaji Krishna,
Babaji Krishna,
Lahiri Mahashaya,
Lahiri Mahashaya,
Swami Shri Yukteswar,
Swami Shri Yukteswar,
beloved Guru,
beloved Guru,
Paramahansa Yogananda,
Paramahansa Yogananda,
saints of all religions,
saints of all religions,
we humbly bow at thy feet.
we humbly bow at thy feet.
Divine Mother,
Divine Mother,
we are your children.
we are your children.
Help us to realize
Help us to realize
that we are free
that we are free
from all limitation,
from all limitations,
from any separation,
from any separation,
from union with thee.
from union with thee.
Bring us home.
Bring us home.
Om Shanti Shanti. The topic today is living in freedom. And Yogananda spoke along these lines very, very often. Because what he said was that we are free. And all we have to do is understand how free we are. He used an analogy once of a bird in a cage. And you open the door of the cage. And the bird likes to stay in that cage. It sees the open door and it's very comfortable with its little cage. I had an experience once when I was working for Swami Priyanandaji and at the Crystal Hermitage, which are the grounds at Ananda Village there where he lived. And there was a little children's swimming pool. And these little frogs would get into the pool, and they were very, very loud. And they would live in the pool, and somebody would ask me to catch the frogs and take them away. And so one day I caught the frog and put him in a little jar, and I took him to a pond on the other side of Ananda Village, far away from that little pool. It was a very, very large pond. And I opened the lid on the jar, and I turned the jar down so he could go into the water, and he came to the edge of the lip of the glass, looked down at this vast pond, and he turned around and went back to the bottom of the jar. And in a way that describes the soul's discomfort at times with the vast expansion that is our reality. And people, they meditate, they have experiences, very deep experiences, and they sometimes get frightened because the expansion is too much. But it's not that the expansion is so much, I think it's more that they are comfortable living in that little frame of the body, the personality, the male, female, the role that they have in life, and they are uncomfortable with stepping out of that. And so the whole process of awakening very much is involved with letting go and becoming free of our limitations in our little self. Yogananda really urged people to not identify with themselves as male, female, whatever job you have, whatever role you have. This is the beauty of Ananda Village over the years, is that when you live at Ananda Village, you see very, very saintly people who have never given a public talk, who have just been simple devotees serving God and the Guru in the garden in many simple ways their whole life. And you see one of the ways that we find this divine freedom. Now, Yogananda talked about one particular analogy that he gave, that he used very often. And so I feel like I have the right to use it very often, even if people hear it a lot. But he said over and over again, he described once being in a movie theater, and he was watching the newsreels before the movie started. It was showing all the carnage from one of the world wars. I think it may have been World War I or II, I don't remember which. And he got caught up in the emotion of watching all this death and destruction. And then he finally noticed that this beam of light was coming from the back of the movie theater onto the screen. And he turned around and he saw that the beam went back to a projection booth. And he realized that this was just a play of shadow and light being projected from the booth on the screen. This is how I think he came up with, in his poem Samadhi, where he talked about the screen of duality. And so he understood that all that he was saying was just shadow and light. There was no reality to it. And he said that this life, one of the most amazing things he said, I think, and it's people don't realize how the impact of what he said. He said that this world is simply just a movie. He said it plays more with our senses. The movie screen in the theater just plays with sound and light. This movie here plays with the sense of smell and the sense of touch and the sense of taste. But he actually said that this dream is no more real than a movie. And those were his exact words. He wasn't saying that this dream is kind of like a movie, this dream is analogous to a movie. He was saying these exact words, that this dream is no more real than a movie. And so we simply are very caught up in this movie. And how do we get uncaught from the movie? He gave several very good ways of doing this. One, he said to essentially look back up the beam, back to the projection booth. And if you follow the beam of light back to its source, it will be back to our own origination, back to the source in God. And the most direct way of doing this is meditation. By concentrating at the point between the eyebrows, concentrating at the light there, essentially what we're doing is we are looking back up the beam, back to the Creator. And when we do that over and over and over again, what happens? We start to change our self-identification from this little self to the Creator. And this is really how we achieve, in the end, union with the Divine, is simply by changing our identity and turning it around from us to the infinite. That's the most direct way, but he gave also several indirect ways that are, while indirect, are just as effective. One of them he taught by serving others. Anytime you serve others, and you give to others, and you put others first, what happens? You start to lose the over-identification with this little self. And so, giving and loving both are ways of expanding our consciousness from this little self. Now, we do have a personality and we have inclinations, and so at some level we have to accept this. But Swami Kriyanandaji was very delightful in how he taught us to not take ourselves too seriously. And one of his favorite expressions, I mentioned this last night at our center in Ananda Nirvana, and I've never seen it written down, but I swear I heard him say this 2 times, so I'm going to repeat it. It was based on, I think it was Shakespeare, who said, "To thy own self be true." Swamiji's version of this was a little bit more humorous than that. He said, "To thine own funky self be true." And he was simply saying that don't take yourself too seriously. Shakespeare, I think, was taking the little self rather too seriously by saying, be true to yourself, I have to be me, and there's a whole popular song about I gotta be me and taking oneself too seriously. And Swamiji was saying, yes, we have a self. It's funky. Accept it, laugh at it, don't take it too seriously, and use it, just be yourself, is what he was saying. He says you can't be someone else. So be true to yourself, but accept the fact that it's not to be taken too seriously. This is the beautiful thing about, over the years, watching different Ananda teachers. Just express these divine teachings in very unique and individual ways, because of course it's going to be flavored or filtered through their personality in a certain way. But it's flavored in it's almost like different kinds of seasonings and spices that just make it more and more delightful. Because what happens also, and this is another way to freedom, is that as you act as an instrument for light and giving to others and serving the Guru especially, as Yogananda said, the instrument is blessed by that which flows through it. And every time we act on behalf of the Guru, every time we offer ourselves to the Guru at the altar in meditation, essentially we're acting as an instrument for the light in a very active and very real way. And we are blessed every time by that which flows through us. When we do an offering of prasad or a puja, those materials, the prasad, for example, is blessed by being offered into the light, by being offered to the divine. And essentially this is what happens especially when we practice the technique of Kriya Yoga. And I'm not going to get into the technique because we don't all have it here. But the principle behind it is actually universal. Swamiji, in his biography of Yogananda, just out of the blue, he said, every Kriya I see now should be an act of devotional self-offering. And he wasn't saying some Kriyas should be that way. He said every single Kriya, one should offer oneself up the spine with complete devotional giving and offering into the light of the infinite, at the feet of the Guru, at the feet of the Divine Mother. And what happens when we do this over and over and over again, just as that offering of prasad is blessed, or the ghee or whatever herbs we use in the puja are blessed and become sacred and sanctified, when we offer ourselves into the light, ourselves, our little self becomes great, becomes sanctified by being offered into the light over and over again. And this essentially is what happens when we serve God and serve the Guru every day in meditation, giving to others. We are offering ourselves into that sacred light of God, and over time, inexorably, this little self becomes sanctified, purified, and blessed by that continual offering into the light. In his book, where Swamiji wrote this, he then explains how this happens in the next sentence, because that sentence about offering, making it a self-offering, is kind of out of context, it seems. Then he talks about the grace of God, because he says that when we offer ourselves into the light, the divine grace comes down and changes us. Many times near the end of his life, Swamiji said that when you lift one hand up to God, God lowers two hands down to pick you up. And you see this over the years with people who love God, people who serve others, people who offer themselves. The very body, the personality, every part of this funky little self becomes sanctified by being offered into the divine presence. The other way, and again I've seen this with Ananda people over the years, it's just beautiful watching. I've been with Ananda since 1977, and I've been serving the Kriya Sangha for maybe about 10 years at different times. And I've worked with many hundreds and thousands of Kriya yogis over the years. And it's been so delightful to see that those who have gone 30, 40 years of daily practice, of daily self-offering, that at the end of their life, they reach a state of freedom that is really quite extraordinary. And I'm going to just use one example, and it's very personal because it was my wife, Maria, who passed away 4 years ago today. So this is the 4th anniversary of her leaving the body. And it was a very sacred moment. Jyotish, Deviji, and myself were sitting with her meditating, and there was such a beautiful grace and light at that moment. But this was someone who, just like all of us, has karma to work out, has fears and challenges. Babaji told the Hari Mahashai to tell all your disciples about this path of Kriya Yoga, that even a little practice of this inward religion will free one from dire fears and colossal sufferings. And like everyone with samskars and karma, she had fears. And one particular fear was actually quite overwhelming at times, which was the fear of leaving the body. It was something that sort of hounded her for many years. And I think in the last year of her life, I think Swami Priyananda really blessed her with a lot of insight, a lot of grace. She emailed him one time and asked him, how do I get over this fear? And he said very simply, you've done it 1,000,000 times or more. When it happens, you'll realize you've done it over and over again. And he says it's really just like going into the next room. That's how impactful it is. It's just like going into the next room. And because of that grace, near the end of her life, I was very concerned for her at different times. And it was very short. This cancer that she had for 10 years came back and went to her brain, and she knew it right away. Within 3 weeks, she gracefully and peacefully and without pain left the body. But I was obviously concerned for her, and she knew I was concerned more on the spiritual level, that she be free of all bondage and limitation and go and live in freedom. And she kept saying to me over and over again, she said, don't worry, I'm free. And she was a very staunch Russian girl. She grew up in the Soviet Union. So she didn't say such things lightly. She was very serious about saying things. And so for her to say that implied an extraordinary degree of divine freedom. How did she achieve that? It was all the ways that I was talking about. And finally, it was another way, which I'll talk about with the Kriya Yogis today, which is that as I was wheeling her in to have her a brain scan so that the doctors could confirm what she already knew, she couldn't stand up anymore, and she knew that I was in a very distraught state. And she was speaking very little. She was very inward her last days of her life because she knew she was going home, and she was not looking back in sentiment or leaving anything behind. She was, as she said over and over again, completely free. In fact, one time she had a little difficulty one morning just with the body, and I just wanted to remind her. I said, "Remember, you're free." And she said, like a little child scolding a parent, she said, "I know that." As if to say, this is a given, and you don't need to bother me by saying that. And as I was wheeling her in to have the MRI, she just said about 6 or 7 words to me. That's about all she said during that period. She said, "Detach yourself, control the reactive process, live the teachings." And I think Jyotish and Devi may have shared this with some people in recent weeks. And when she was saying control the reactive process, she was saying control your reactions to events. And Swamiji and Yoganandaji talked about this reactive process. And we realize in what they teach us is that events themselves are not what bind us and what cause us dismay and cause us to be upset and depressed or sad or elated even. They have taught us that all these things are caused by the energy in the spine. And this reactive process is simply we react to a seemingly negative event by allowing the energy to go down the spine and plunge us into despair or sadness. And when we see something positive or we hear some good news, we allow the energy to go up because we don't have control over it. And what the yogis teach and what our gurus taught is that when you control this reactive process, what it means is that you have control over the life force in the spine. And this is pranayama. This is control of the life force. And this is what Kriya Yoga gives one. And this is why Yogananda used to sing this chant. Pranayam be thy religion. Pranayam will give thee salvation. Pranayam is the wishing tree. Pranayam is beloved God. Master said that whoever wrote that chant took poetic license by saying, going over the top and saying things like pranayam is beloved God. But he was saying later that when we develop control of the life force and the reactive process, we have control of everything. We have control of our lives. We have control of our thought process, our emotions, everything that happens to us. And the greatest control that it gives us is the ability to be completely free. This is how the saints live, the saints and the masters. This is why they can be in divine bliss no matter what happens to them. This is why Christ can be nailed on the cross, and rather than be dismayed, he's giving divine love to those who are crucifying him. Because when you have that control of the reactive process, you can, at will, bring the life force up to the point between the eyebrows and offer yourself with complete freedom into the infinite and holding nothing back. If you could do that this very moment, completely offer yourself into the divine, holding nothing back, you would go into samadhi at this moment. The catch is that you don't have control, and you're holding on to things. I'm not speaking about all of you, I'm speaking all of us, to whatever degree we are in bondage. There's a funny cartoon I saw once. There's a cat in America who has a cartoon named after him. The cat's name is Garfield. And it shows him in various events in life with his human masters, although he's really the master in the end. And it shows him on the back of a couch. And he has just slid down the back of the couch with his claws, and the claws have shredded the back of the couch. And the caption is Garfield saying, "Everything I let go of has claw marks on it." And how this applies here is that don't leave claw marks on anything at the end of life. Simply let go, because in the end, we are not this little self. We are the infinite self. And all these things that we do in our lives, in a way, prepare us for what Swami Kriyananda called the final exam, that time of leaving the body and finally letting go. Now, there's a few other ways that we can work with this. Yogananda, it's a reading of his. This is my favorite reading passage of his because it really reminds us the way out. I actually at my home at Noida Village, although my home's going to be here in Gurgaon this coming year, I have this on my refrigerator. And you put on your refrigerator in America, you put things on there that you think you're going to forget, like a shopping list. You think there's something you have to buy, and so you put it on, carved on magnet on your refrigerator. And so these are one of those things that I don't want to forget. I want to remember all the time. And the other night I was counseling someone who was caught up in karma. They were identifying with their karma. They were in despair over things that were going on in their lives. And he said that your job for now is to get to God. Don't worry about all the karma you will still have to complete. Let God worry about that. First, destroy in yourself the source of karmic involvement. That source is your attachment to the ego. Once the ego is merged in him, then any actions you perform will no longer revert to yourself. Your actions will be like writing on water. They will leave no trace in the mind. In severing yourself from egoic involvement in any action that you perform, you will have cut the Gordian knot of delusion. This is the state of the Jivan Mukta, one who is free inside, even while living in this world. Being inwardly free, nothing he does can ever affect him again. Now, isn't that a beautiful way of living that one could hope to achieve? But in fact, we can start living that way now. I have a couple of friends at Ananda who have done something that I've also done over the years, which is at least pretend that you are a Jivan Mukta. And so you ask yourself, how would a Jivan Mukta behave in this situation? How would a Jivan Mukta react in this situation? Because in fact, we really are already free. We just don't know it. We've just forgotten it. Yogananda was looking at some of his disciples one time, and he just said, you have no idea how beautiful you all are. You are just all made of light. And he was seeing something that is a reality that they were not seeing, because just the cloud of delusion was coming over them. He once told some of his disciples that if at this moment all you have to do is to say you are free, and you will be free. And one disciple said, well, wait a minute. If I said I was free, I really wouldn't be free. And Yogananda said, no, you wouldn't, because you don't think you're free. You would just be saying it. He was saying essentially that the only difference between someone who is free completely in God and those who are bound is just very, very simply the identification with freedom versus the identification with this little self. And in a way, it's also a direction, because the direction in life that we choose with our free will is to go towards freedom, to go towards the light, to go towards service to God and the Guru, service to others, towards divine love, or to hold on to the little self, to all our hurts and pains, and remember all the little things that have gone bad or good in our lives, because good things are binding just as much as bad things. And you see this in people who become extraordinarily wealthy. And in America, I see this very common, and I think it's probably universal. You'd almost have to say it's bad karma to become extraordinarily wealthy, because you see how unhappy people get when they're trying to hold on to everything, and they get caught up in acquiring and all these different ways of just, again, making the self smaller. In a way, it's almost like when people are trying to acquire more and more wealth, properties, and power, in a way, they're actually tuning into something very real, which is that they think that if they become bigger, in a way, more expansive, by having more stuff, they will become freer. And in fact, it actually just makes one more smaller and brittle, but they're tuning into a really divine truth, which is that it's expansion of the little self that helps one to become free. And it's the lack of identification that helps one become free. Patanjali, in the Yoga Sutras, said something very interesting. He said that, in talking about the yamas and the niyamas, he said that one develops spiritual powers or siddhis when you perfect different ones of the 10 yamas and niyamas. And very interestingly, when he said that when one perfects non-attachment or greed towards what one has, he says you develop the power to remember past lives. And I was always curious about this, because maybe I'm an exception, but I've never ever been interested in my past lives for some reason. It's just this life seems to be where I'm at and I'm in the moment, and this is a blessed life, loving God, serving the Guru. What more could you ask from a lifetime? And so I've never been interested. And so I've asked myself, well, how can it be a spiritual power? It's not something that is really helpful to me in a way. But really what he was talking about is that when you lose identification with yourself as a man or a woman, as a business person, as a teacher or parent or whatever, when you lose identification with that little self, and when you lose the attachment to all the things around it, including your personality, he says that what happens is that, in a sense, by not identifying with this life overly much, you remember all of your lifetimes. And what happens when you remember all of your lifetimes is that, obviously, just think about it, what it would be like to remember all your lifetimes in this moment, from the time you were a rock or a worm or whatever, all the way to this one. What would happen? And just think about the consciousness that you would go into when you recognize that. It would be extraordinary expansion, for one. I don't think it would be extreme confusion, unless you were trying to hold on to this life. What it would mean is that you would see behind all of these lifetimes, you would fully understand for the first time that you are not any of those lifetimes, because obviously not being attached in this one means you're not attached to the other ones, and you see this whole panorama of yourself as a divine being, and that you are none of these things. You are the light behind the personality, you are light behind this man or this woman or this funky self, whatever it is. And so, live in freedom even now. You don't have to perfect these things. You can start to live in freedom now. You can start to sever these attachments. And again, we've been given by our gurus these extraordinary tools for doing this. Kriya Yoga, service to others, practicing everything, even meditation. Swamiji one time was talking to Yogananda, and he said to Master, he was having difficulty meditating. And Yogananda said, even see your meditation as Nishkam Karma, as Karma Yoga. Act in meditation, give to God, give to the Guru, serve others, even in meditation, and don't be attached to the results. And when you're not attached to the results, in that moment of non-attachment, you are divinely free. So live this way, practice these things, do this in this incredible center. The vibrations here are so wonderful. I can see you're serving others very deeply here. Keep doing that. And at the end of your life, if not much sooner, we can all say very seriously and with really complete conviction, don't worry, I'm free. And we can be that even now. So may the blessings of our gurus be with us as we strive to reach this eternal freedom of ourselves.